And welcome to day 6 and one more day to the end of our official learning days. Please, if you're just watching us on YouTube for the first time, try to look for our previous classes from day 1 to day 5 that introduces us into Microsoft Identity and Access Administrator, and also explain how um, we can use this identity and access administrator experience to drive security in the identity space. My name is Joy Emedom. I'm a Textilers mentor. I'm also the head of communications and media in Textilers. I'm a senior security consultant, and I have about, if not more, 7 years experience currently in identity and access management. And we have, at the beginning of the program, understood what identity and access management is. We broke it down to explain that there are different service providers that provide identity and access management. However, in the program, we'll be looking at Microsoft's identity protection system, which is the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. We first of all even started by understanding why it's very important to have an identity and access management, and we looked at the key security framework or methodology that we use to drive an identity and asset management, which is based on zero trust, where we verify explicitly, we assume breach, and then we, provide least privilege. These three core foundations enable us to ensure that we run a proper secured identity and access management platform. And then all through the program, we started from scratch to show you how to create your users, to show you how to assign your users to group. We looked at how an identity is just beyond a user. An identity can be a user, it can be a device, it can be an application, it can be a group. Anything that is required to give you access, grant you access into an infrastructure has been classified under identity. We went further to look into how to create groups. We also looked at that for some organizations that are still maturing into cloud identity, that are still leveraging on their on-prem infrastructure. And are still leveraging on their on-prem infrastructure. We looked at how they can extend the functionalities on the cloud, on the Microsoft Azure Active Directory Cloud, to their on-prem infrastructure using what we call the identity federation. So in this instance, we looked at the Azure AD Connect. We looked at how to assign Azure AD roles, how to delegate roles. We looked at how to also include in identity. We looked at even external users as an identity. Okay, and then we looked at license assignment as ways that we manage access and permissions. We also understood the importance to secure our identity using multi-factor authentication, using the concept of what you are, what you know, and what you have to improve on the security layer of an identity. And we also extended, into looking at how to use conditional access policies to define where users go, to look at their, to evaluate where users go, to look at the context of the authentication, and to provide, an enhanced security. We went further last week to now look at one of Microsoft's very, very powerful identity tool, which is the Microsoft Azure AD Identity Protection Tool, that enables us to secure identities by looking at different identity protection methods, such as signing, risky user signings, just to ensure that an account, an identity is secure, and how we can, implement and infuse MFA and conditional access policies based on these user behaviors that we have seen using the Microsoft Azure AD identity protection. We also went ahead to also, briefly look at Microsoft's Entra Permission, which is a new management platform that Microsoft has introduced that can allow us to do permission management, access reviews, which will be our last class next week around identity governance, and how to manage and ensure that this access that you have given, you maintain a proper identity governance on this environment. May I, advise you, if you're not yet a member of the Textilers community, to join us, because one of the benefits is that beyond the cohort, we are building and transforming leaders. So our major aim is that when we start the year with the cohort, the whole idea is to help you now build a career path on whatever cohort you have, cohort learning path you have joined, and then help you to master into that all through the year. So it doesn't just end by the learning days. The learning days are the foundation to get you endeared into this career path, so that as we continue in the community, we can begin to work on building this skill and this portfolio. So please do well to join us in the community if you're not yet a member, by joining our Discord channel and leverage on other benefits that you get. So today we'll be looking at implementing access management for apps. We're looking at this on a very high level, how we implement access management for apps. So we looked at applications as also another way of identity, and how our access to applications, also determine the level of exposure that we have as an organization. Any questions so far? Okay.
No, ma.
On, ma.
Not from me.
So back in prior to COVID, again, the good thing, it's always very important that when you learn technology, it's always good to have an idea of what it was before, in order for you to actually appreciate where you are today, and then understand how to improve. Some people are lucky in the course of their job, they just join organizations that are 100% cloud, don't have any interaction with on-prem, never had any need to. And so it's easy for them to build their identity framework around that. However, there are organizations that are moving to the cloud. So the pandemic enabled them to begin to see that they cannot restrict their users to on-prem. So one of the things that Microsoft began to see was that people began to have the need to use their identity to access cloud apps, right? You want to connect to an application that you see online, and then you have the option of using your Microsoft account or using your Gmail account. Even as corporate entities, they began to see that if they needed to infuse collaboration apps that were SaaS applications, in order for their users to have a seamless experience, it would, in order to balance operations, they will need to integrate their own identity system to those SaaS applications. However, there was a need to understand how these identities were being used and grant access. And that's what brought about this product that Microsoft calls the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. It used to be called the Microsoft Cloud App Security, but now it's called the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. So it's either an on-premise or a cloud-based security policy enforcement point. It allows you, it is placed between your cloud service, your consumers, and your cloud service provider. What it does is it helps you to enforce policies to cloud-based resources. Again, I said, so if your organization, for instance, is using Salesforce as an application, right? Salesforce is a cloud-based application. You're not installing it anywhere. You buy the cloud base, you integrate it to your identity solution. You want to be able to get insights into Salesforce, be able to see how users are using it, how are users even moving data from Salesforce, that is corporate data, out of Salesforce. And even Gmail today, people use Gmail in their corporate devices, right? And that Google that they're using, Google web browser that they're using their corporate device, is an identity that needs to be managed, because the moment that's on their corporate device, it means that it has introduced a possible entry point for compromise. So there's a need to have visibility into what people are doing, when they use. And when we say visibility, it's not necessarily, but just to be sure that, okay, are people copying company data? So if we say, for instance, you cannot use USB on your laptops, are people opening their Gmails and moving company PowerPoints or product files um, into their Gmail account, and the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps can enable you to be able to inject, security policies that can give you insights, and help you to protect your company data, your services, and your applications with these policies. Is this bold enough, or is it very small? So you have, like I said, prior to the pandemic, people will come into the office, and even from,
It's quite
and
time.
it's quite tiny,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
I noticed it here and I can't find where to expand it. Not seeing. Is it better?
Yeah, yeah, it's better. Once you read, will follow. Yeah.
Okay. Mhm. So, so prior to the pandemic, what you will find will be that, people will come into the office, use company um, systems that are in the office. So what happened is that, for instance, if you were going to the internet, your traffic was going through the internet, through the company internet, and through the company firewall. That's typically what you would see in prior to the pandemic, when everybody was working from the office. Now that people take their devices home and connect to their own personal internet, right? So it means that from the network layer, as a company, you don't have visibility anymore. You don't know where I'm going to. I can go to any site, I can go to illicit sites, and there's no firewall at the network layer to block me, right? So one of the things Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps will help you do is that it would, because people now have your corporate identity, you can be able to build a security framework using your corporate identity around where they go to. So if they were going to go to XYZ site with company, with company address or with company devices, it will be able to detect it. So for instance, if somebody took a device that was not even company device and was opening company email, that device will automatically, because you are using a company address, joy.contoso.com, right, on a device that is classified as unmanaged. The moment you do that, because of cloud apps, it's going to flag that my device is unmanaged. And the moment I flag as unmanaged, it will push the unmanaged device policies for me, right? Um, the moment I'm coming in as an external user too, I will match the policy for external user. The moment I'm coming in from a public or home Wi-Fi, I will match a policy. So ideally, when you are home, you will just go through your own internet and then just go ahead and hit applications, hit things. There are no controls. However, now with Microsoft Cloud Apps, the moment my identity is joy@contoso.com and I am trying to access company email, and the Microsoft Defender for Cloud sees that I am coming from a public and home Wi-Fi, it automatically gives me a policy that has been targeted towards people that are browsing from home and public Wi-Fi. So it could be that the policy could be that make sure that their antivirus is updated, make sure that on 3 attempts of logging, if they fail, lock the account, whatever it is. So I'm coming from home network and I can put more, strict zero trust policies that enable me to understand the identity and access of my user. I don't know if that makes sense.
Please, could you go over it again?
Okay. Let's take it back to, I like to use real life scenarios. So prior to pandemic, almost of organizations were come to the office and work. Everybody will come to the office. Now, the security architecture on a high level of that used to be that a user will be here, user, we call it U, and this user from their device, maybe their laptop, or their desktop, will connect through a firewall. And then from that firewall, they will go over to the internet. It's just a high level of what will normally happen. You'll be here when you come to the office, you take your office laptop. Oh, I want to go to Linda Ikeji blog on your office laptop. That's fine, because your office has put in all their security measures. So the moment you put in Linda Ikeji blog on your laptop, and what you're doing is, because you're going to the internet, Linda Ikeji blog is not your company website. It's not your company intranet portal. It's not your company HR portal. It's a blog on the internet. So you're going to the internet, you hit a firewall, this is a high level, and then you go to the internet. Now, what that means is that as you're using that Google browser or Microsoft Edge or whatever to browse, in the event where there's a cross-site scripting or anything that is injected into that browser, right? Because you're coming in through your corporate firewall, on your corporate firewall, they've put in certain rules that enable them to identify those vulnerabilities and then, address it at that layer, because you're using the company firewall. Now, when the pandemic happened, right? When the pandemic happened, what happened was that everybody started working from home. So the moment you started working from home, what happened? You fell under this category of public and Wi-Fi users, right? Because you're now using you're using a public Wi-Fi, maybe you go to the internet cafe, or you're using your home Wi-Fi. That's what will happen. You are no more at the corporate headquarters. Corporate headquarters was how people were connecting prior to the pandemic. They would go to their office. But now you are you're connecting from your public Wi-Fi, right? So I'm saying, one of the ways that the Microsoft Defender for Cloud App helps us is to enforce zero trust security, right? That allows us to see real-time activities, analyze signals, and then push out real-time policies. Okay. Now, a user has taken their laptop home. It means that when they go to these same blogs that have the possibility to introduce malware into the system, they are not connecting from the company firewall. So we can't protect them, right? So, but because of Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, we can introduce this protection. Why? Because we can now put policies that say, if somebody is connecting, right, to corporate data, but from public Wi-Fi, enforce this kind of policy. Let the person probably validate with MS, so that any other thing that you have introduced on your system will not interface with the company um, data. So we will know that, okay, when you're doing company work, it's secure. So even if your system is compromised and somebody is trying to harvest, the moment you see that because you are coming from a public or a home Wi-Fi, there are certain restrictions that already your access will not allow you. So quote and unquote, if your device has already gotten compromised, which if it's a company device, at least it shouldn't get compromised because at the endpoint level, there should be protection. But let us say for any reason it gets, when that account is trying to harvest your company credentials and access the company network, because it's not coming from the company headquarters, it's coming from a public or home Wi-Fi. We can see these signals and then we can now send a more secure and enforced policy, which wasn't there before. Before, once you take your device home and do anything, that's it. You bring it back to the office. What we typically would see is we begin to get either antivirus flagging, malware detections, or we get the SIM. So unless the person brings back that device to the office before we can get those signals. But now we can get signals on devices because there are ways to enforce policies from the identity access perspective. So the moment you fall inside any of this category, we can change the access policy automatically that you are using. So if you are coming from corporate headquarters, there's a type of policy that will come to you, and then we know that, okay, you are using our Wi-Fi and you are using our firewall, you're using this, we can control what you do. But the moment you're coming from a public or home Wi-Fi, we push in another secure access policy to you, because now we know that you are not on our network totally, and so we need to be able to restrict what and what you do, the type of data that you copy out, because you are not on company policy network. I don't know, does that help?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
And the same applies to even unmanaged devices too. There are times you, for some reason, maybe your company laptop, you worked all through the night and then you there was no power, so you drained the battery, and by the time you woke up in the morning, you need to do something, but your laptop has died, and then your personal laptop still has power, or your friend's laptop still has battery life. You take it and want to sign into your company email or your company apps. The moment you are doing that, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps allows us to enforce another policy to you. So the policy you were getting when you were connecting from corporate is different from the policy you get when you are connecting from public Wi-Fi, and it's different from the policy you get when you're connecting from unmanaged devices. And this helps us to manage your identity and the access, because the moment we see that you're connecting from an unmanaged device, what tells us is that it's possible that that device is already infected. It's possible that that device has command and controls on it. So it means that if you are connecting from an unmanaged device and you want to go into Finance Portal, and Finance Portal is where they probably have access to certain vaults or access to certain transactions, the company policy could be like, from unmanaged devices, don't allow anybody to go here. So the moment you connect from there, you get denied if you're going to something that ideally, if you're on corporate headquarters, you will just quickly have access to it. So that's why you see some people tell you that, oh, when I'm not in the office, there are certain things I cannot do, because the company has defined that, oh, this kind of things, there's risk to having people do it when they're outside the company network. It's like people who are tellers in the bank. No matter how we go, they can never have access to the core banking from their home, because that means they can log in and do transactions, right? So those assets are restricted and tied to company network IP addresses, just so that even if somebody was going to hack the internet banking, sorry, the corporate banking, either like Finaco address, it means that the person was actually within the corporate network. It helps even in investigation and analysis. So one of the ways that we enforce Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is to use what we call the Cloud Discovery Map. It helps us to identify, your cloud environment, the types of cloud apps that your organization is using. So, like I said, this way you can know, oh, we have users that go to porn sites, we have users that go to illicit sites, So what do we do? So we can now categorize those apps into sanctioning and unsanctioning apps. So when we're now creating policies, we can say if somebody is doing ABCD and where the person is going to, those apps are inside the category of unsanctioning, then XYZ do this. So the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps allows us to do discovery. Once we do this, because you can't even know how, first of all, do you know all the kind of applications or web portals or web apps that your users access? You can't, especially because they're working from home. So they're not hitting your personal, they're not hitting your corporate firewall. So you can't see. So one of the things that we do is once you deploy the Microsoft Defender for Cloud App, it does a cloud app discovery using from the tenant everywhere the company corporate ID is. It scans the network and it can find the internet and it can find all the places that your users go to. Okay, and then even on their devices, it can find all the types of web pages they go to and then populate it for you and do a bit of an artificial intelligence analysis on it, where it can even categorize for you that these are risky sites by default, or you as an organization can choose to create and categorize these apps, right? And then when you sanction that, that determines whether you allow or deny. You can also include connectors. Some of the third-party apps, cloud app providers have also created API connectors that can allow you connect directly to them so that you can even enforce more stringent policies. And then the good thing is you can now use the conditional access that we learned before to now determine what happens when certain of access to these apps are identified. And then the policy control will now also help you define what will happen to these user accounts, when they access these apps. So the Microsoft Defender for Cloud will help you have continuous control, and continually fine-tuning these policies. It's a continuous thing, but you now gain extra visibility even though your users are no more sitting in your corporate headquarters. Some of the key functionalities of the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is the Shadow IT discovery, right? So what's Shadow IT? IT now cannot, before the pandemic, IT companies will say, oh, this is the list of our approved applications. We know where all these applications are. We install them. We know what users are going to. Now they're not connecting through the corporate network. So how do we know? So the IT function becomes like a shadow. And so it helps you to perform, shadow IT functions like discovery of all these cloud apps. Then it now enforces information protection on them. So you can say, oh, if somebody is coming from an unmanaged device and the person is opening payroll, person in HR and opening payroll, it can only come up in read only. It can never come up in edit mode, and it can never be allowed to be saved or copied out once it is in an unmanaged device. You can also do things like threat protection. You can look for unusual behaviors, and then do things like compliance assessment against regulatory requirements. We all know today that lots of people use a lot of productivity online tools, right, to make their work, efficient for them. But how many of your users understand the governance around using this tool? I was preparing for a deck for a workshop, and because I use ChatGPT a lot, but I just knew that for that particular project I couldn't do it because the information that I had in my company that I needed to get ChatGPT to help me, restructure or give me other insight were too sensitive that if I take it and put there, like those data were client specific, so I can't do it. So things like Microsoft Cloud Apps, and because I know that Microsoft Cloud Apps will detect it, I didn't even have to bother doing it. But in those kind of scenarios, you have people who want to use productivity tools like that to help themselves. What will happen is, if you have a client where you have already signed an NDA and a memorandum of understanding, on data protection, where data cannot leave XYZ, and you now have staff who genuinely they want to make work easy for themselves, be able to copy company data and put in this. And for instance, there's a possible breach of that cloud provider. What happens is that your company too, at that moment, has to also declare cloud breach, a possible breach, because that data that you as a customer confided in them, they've shared it also with a cloud provider that has been compromised. So companies are very, very sensitive with things like this. Prior to now, it wasn't a big deal because you could lock everything down. Oh, only when people are in the office, we will see them from the firewall. Now people are working from home. So you want to be able to, enforce these policies on these applications that you have not yet sanctioned, as IT, when people are using them, so that they meet compliance standard, because that's a huge security risk to your organization, which IT would never have insight to if you don't have a tool like this. So things like risk assessment can be done in a more robust way using Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps now, because you can actually see all the different types of cloud applications that your users use that are not in your sanctioned list. This is just talking about, some of also the capabilities that we can do. As an admin, you gain rich visibility, you have data control, you have sophisticated analytics, and also you can identify possible cyber threats. There are different deployment modes. You can do log collector mode, you can do API connection, and you can do things like reverse proxy. So moving to the cloud, very flexible, good. Employees like it, IT like it. However, it has now introduced a new challenge and complexity that organizations are battling with on how to keep themselves secure. So solutions like the Microsoft Cloud app allows you get full benefits of cloud services, and IT now is now able to balance. Okay, let's grant access, or people can access their emails from home. People can access these kind of things from home, because now we have another solution that we have put in place that can give us certain insights. If not, it becomes harder in the world of cloud to be able to still be compliant, and provide visibility, for IT. So typical setup is this: once you log into your Microsoft identity security.microsoft, if you go down, you will see the cloud app security, and then you enable it. It's a very clean step by step. It's on the lab for you to do, and then it will start to discover apps for you. And when it discovers, you can now save them. Again, we always like to chip in that, because you're going to have scenarios where, oh, my company is still on-prem, how do I leverage this powerful tool? That is where federation comes in. Just the same way we talked about the Azure AD Connect, it's the same way we can use the the Active Directory Federation service to extend this functionality to the cloud, right? So that the organization can still benefit from this MCAS functionality, even though you are using an on-prem Active Directory. So it's not limited to, oh, my identity provider must be in the cloud. If your identity provider is still on-prem, you can use the AD Federation services to integrate and be able to still discover and gain insight. Some connectors already exist for certain applications. So the likes of AWS, DocuSign, Dropbox, Google Workspace, Azure, Atlassian, Box. These are some of the existing connectors that allow you to connect directly to these apps. So it even gives you more visibility. These cloud app providers have provided API connectors for companies to be able to connect to them, so that they can gain more visibility when people use them. And it's just another way too that enables these cloud providers ensure that you also gain visibility in the event where probably there's a possible compromise from their own application. You already have direct API connections to them, and so you can gain insight into how your users are using, how your users are using them. And these API connections are through HTTPS. So just a summary about how this is deployed. The app connectors definitely require admin full privileges that connect, and then you grant authentication permissions. This is where an admin function is. So an admin sets up the Defender for Cloud, does the connection of the connectors. You have to be a global admin to be able to do this, and you can actually set up periodical type of scans, for users and for activities. Again, just to reiterate that when you use app connectors, so for third-party cloud providers that already provide connectors, the good thing is you gain extra things like audit trail, account governance. You can see more visibility into users' accounts, profile, status, accounts that have been suspended. So if I'm using things like AWS accounts, if my AWS accounts have been compromised, because your IT team has already set up the connection between your Defender for Cloud Apps and AWS, you'll be able to gain those visibilities and be able to flag that, oh, somebody is using an AWS account that has already been compromised, even though you are Microsoft identity. But because of the API connection, you can see visibility into your users who use AWS and have compromised identity. The good thing with some of these integrations already, because these are not new products of Microsoft, different enterprise organizations are now collaborating with Microsoft, right? So there are thousands of pre-integrated applications. You can see them. But if an organization also built their own business app, we'll be seeing how Microsoft allows you to integrate your business apps here so that it can also gain visibility. So for those in the Power Apps side, as they're building Power Apps business application, they can actually get the Defender for Cloud Apps to be able to get visibility into these apps and give them threat analytics and intelligence around these apps as people use it. All right, so you would also in the lab see how to implement your access management for apps. The labs will take you through how to create an app on your Azure and grant that app permission and grant its users permission. It's also very important that when you want to, when you're registering a new application, always restrict who has access to register an application. If not, if somebody's account is compromised and that person has ability to register an application, the person can register an application and publish it to all staff. And that application could have a code that you could just have an interface that looks like a login of your HR portal. Meanwhile, at the back end, it's harvesting people's credential. And before IT will be able to trace that there's a rogue application being published, they would have harvested lots of people's credentials. So it's important that when you are setting up your identity platform, the function and ability for people to be able to register application is very limited to only those that need it. Remember, we said least privilege is one of the methodologies that we apply. So always make sure that you restrict who can, register applications, who can manage them, who can assign owners to application, who have built-in administrative roles to grant access to configured application. It's very important that you don't give this access to just everybody, especially the developers and application team when they come. Remember, segregation of duty. That's one key thing that I'm putting out in the project assignment I'm giving you. Your ability to know how to do segregation of duty helps you now know how to implement your access controls. So some of the built-in application roles are application administrator, cloud application administrator. Who can remember in the last class what I talked about using built-in roles? I gave a brief explanation on best practice on how to use built-in application roles. Who can remember? My class is quiet. What happened? Are people eating lunch?
No, it's not lunchtime yet.
Okay, can you guys remember when I said that when you are assigning roles, you will see the built-in one. For your lab, your lab will just guide you on how to say, oh, go and add somebody into Azure Virtual Machine Administrator. That's fine. But in reality, and that's how we set it in the project assignment, you have to create custom roles. And I'm sure that in one of the labs, it taught you how to create custom. So for instance, if I want to grant people application administrator, remember what Azure has done is it has just created one group called application administrator. It doesn't know whether you have 20 applications in your organization or 30 applications, right? It has just created one default built-in group called application administrator. And the function of that group is they have the ability to manage all aspects of enterprise application, including registrations and application proxy settings. Now, Franca is an application administrator for HR, for Power BI, I mean. Titi is an application administrator for firewalls, Palo Altos and the rest. Miriam is an application administrator for maybe the what are these people? Property management application that they have. And so 308, what's your name? I don't know, I still keep forgetting. What's your name?
Is this Chioma Okafo?
Oh yeah, okay. I know she was
Chioma.
in the last cohort. I think so.
Yes. Yeah. I
And then
think her name is Chioma Okafo. I'm not sure, but I don't know what she's using. Can you
she's
speak? Maybe she's muted
muted.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so 308, if you can speak, correct us. I know you've told me your name, I've forgotten. I remember you were in the last cohort, I remember. So 4 of you are all application administrators, but you're application administrators for different applications, right? So in segregation of duty, if I take the 4 of you and I put inside the built-in administrator role called application administrator, who can tell me what is wrong with that?
Okay. So what's the question again? Could you?
The 4 of you are
Yeah.
the 4 of you are application administrators, but you're application administrators for 4 different applications. Now, if when a request was sent to me, Joy, kindly add Franca, give Franca application administrator rights. And all I did was I went into the built-in admin, took Franca, added her, she becomes an application administrator. Then I get another mail tomorrow that says Chioma Okafo is an application administrator for the property management solution. Kindly grant her application administrator role. They've put approval. I go again inside here and I put her there. The same thing for Titi, the same thing for Miriam. What is wrong with that? I've granted them application administrator. When they go back to want to do any of this function, which is manage applications, register, manage application proxy settings, they will find out that they can do it. So as far as they are concerned, you have sorted out their request. You go and close your service ticket, good. But from an identity and access management perspective, when the people that are doing governance and review are doing it, they will flag that for you because you have done something wrong. So I'm saying, what is wrong with what I've done?
There is no segregation of duty.
Let's take it one by one.
Okay.
Okay, let's go one by one. Frank, after you, then Titi will go. All right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm saying here that there is no segregation of duty. Everybody is application administrator.
So what should I do?
You should have okay, one person, maybe one person to manage, one person to do the registration, and another person to do, the different duties.
Okay, you answered 2. Your answer A is correct. Your answer B is wrong. Who else who wants to go? And who else wants to try? Titi.
Yes, sir. Yes, my same idea is segregation of duty is not observed.
Good. So that one we all agree, segregation of duty is not observed. So how do you now apply segregation of duty is where Franca missed it. So who can tell us how do we now apply the segregation of duty? based on this use case?
To assign by role.
So let me help you. Remember, so that's why you must always understand what's your use case. If the 4 of you were all in HR, and so the request was the 4 of you should be given application administrator role for HR application, then the segregation of duty, the B part of it will be, okay, find out, is Mariam going to be for registration? Is Franca going to be for modifying? Is Miriam going to be for managing? But that was not the use case I said. I said the 4 of you are 4 different application administrators. You are managing 4 different applications. Franca is an application administrator for Power BI. Miriam is an application for property management. This is an administrator for firewall application, maybe like Palo. Choma is an administrator for maybe things like Salesforce. You are all those are applications, and you are all administrators. When the request came, he said, IT, kindly give them application administrator role so that they can create the application on the Azure tenant. And all you did was go into the built-in administrator and was adding the 4 of them. What that will mean is that because you have used in the built-in application administrator, when Franca goes and creates her application, Power BI application, Miriam will be able to make changes to that application, even though Miriam is not in Franca's team. If Titi goes and creates her own application, Franca will be able to go and make changes there, because the 4 of them are inside one access control policy role. So what should be done is I should come to application administrator and create custom application administrator role. So I can have 4: HR application administrator, Power BI application administrator, property manager administrator, and then in each of those 4, I put in each of you there. If I now come to Power BI application administrator, I can now sit with the team and say, how many people are going to be doing Power BI administrator? What are their different functions? And I can now create different access rights. But in the first use case I gave you, the 4 of you are 4 different application administrators. So if you keep using the built-in, because Microsoft does not know whether your organization has 20, 30 applications, all it knows is that it has created one application role. So if you just use built-in application, built-in roles, the challenge is that everybody will have the same access right there, even when they are for different departments. Does that make sense now? Did you guys get it?
Yes, it does. Okay, so what you're saying is that
Yes.
okay, for the 4 of us, we need to be specific. Say, if one is in Power BI application, if one is a Power BI application administrator, the other one property, to segregate them further. Yeah.
Yes, you must always understand your use case. The use case I gave was that the 4 of you are all application administrators for different applications. So the segregation of duty should be that you should have 4 different application administrator roles. You cannot be in the same, except the scenario where they say in our company, everybody should be an application administrator. Every developer, irrespective of the application you are developing, then we can now say the segregation of duties, what can they do? But here, the segregation of duty is saying you are all different application administrators, so you can't have the same ability to modify another person's application. So that's how the questions come in tricky, and you need to pay attention.
In a nutshell, we have to create a custom application rule for each users.
Exactly. So you can even see the next exercise is asking you create a new custom role.
Sorry, before you go on to that, can you explain the difference between the application administrator and the cloud application administrator?
To be honest with you, this is not cast in stone because you have multiple types of administrator role, right? It's subjective to what the organization wants. These are just default roles that Microsoft has created. So for me, it's knowing what the difference is does not help you in entirety to know how to do segregation of duty, because your organization might be a mix of the person who is doing application is the same person who is doing cloud. So you can see that the difference between these two here is that the person who is an application administrator cannot change an application proxy setting. That's what Microsoft has categorized. But if in your organization, because of lack of staff, they say people in application administrator should also be the same people in cloud administrator, it doesn't make any difference. However, but they have come to say the people in application and cloud, 2 people should be able to do A, 2 people should be able to do B. It's about the organization that you are managing the identity. What is their use case? Then you come back to Microsoft Azure, look at the different application rules and see the one you want to custom. The takeaway point is don't use built-in roles. Built-in roles are flat structure. They don't help you effectively apply segregation of duty. So the difference between application administrator and cloud application, this is the difference here. It's written here.
Okay, excludes the ability to manage.
Yeah, and I'm saying it's
Okay.
relative. It doesn't make any sense to, it's not, it's just, it's what Microsoft says. But if in your organization, one person can be doing the 2 things, so what difference does it make? Joy can be inside application administrator and also be inside cloud administrator. So if Joy is inside application administrator and in cloud, and application administrator is allowing me make changes, you haven't restricted my change by putting me in cloud. You haven't. You haven't, because my organization says I should be able to have the 2 abilities. But if the organization comes out clearly to say, we have application administrators and we don't want them to have the ability to manage application proxy settings, then you know, okay, the custom role I want to create should be from cloud application custom role. But my point is always pay attention to what does the organization want versus what you have on Azure.
Okay, so in essence, okay, you're saying do not use just built-in admin.
It's not what I'm saying.
Rules.
No, it's
No,
not
no, no,
about what
no.
I
No,
want
I
us
mean,
to agree that that is how it should be done.
okay.
Because if you don't understand and agree with me, if you are faced with a real life scenario, you won't do it. I'm saying we're understanding identity and access, and I'm saying that's best practice. Do you agree that that's how it should be done? You shouldn't use built-in, and I gave an example. So I'm saying, do you agree that that's how it should be done? So that if we don't agree, we can brainstorm, and we might just be able to change the narrative today.
I agree, ma.
Franca doesn't seem to agree.
I agree. You're teaching us. I didn't know that. You're just teaching us. So and now you've explained why.
Yes, and
So
I don't
agree
want
with
you. So when I teach, I don't like people to learn it as casting. So like I said, it's the concept that you need to learn. Your question might not come from application administrator and cloud application. That's what I'm saying. And if you don't know the concept, you become confused. You say, during the class, it was cloud administrator, and now I'm seeing virtual machine administrator and server administrator. Yeah, it's not the same. It's the same. It's about what did the use case say the administrators should do, and what is this role saying that they can do, so that I don't put them inside built-in roles. Because built-in role means that they will do everything that is here. So that's why you can see that your lab is saying, create a new custom role to grant access to manage app registration. So you can see a custom role can be assigned at the organization-wide scope, which is what the built-in ones do, or at the scope of a single Azure AD object, which is you are now very specific to what that role should do. The built-in roles give you access to everything. So that's why you see sometimes people don't know that they've granted a junior staff who shouldn't even have access to make certain changes access. And when that person's account is compromised, that person didn't even know his account can do A, B, C, D. So when you're creating applications, some of the key things that you need to put are things like the application ID, the object ID. These things are default. So as an identity and access person, don't bulge your head about this. If application administrators have created the application and they want to publish it, they already know these things. They must provide an application. The people who develop applications, they know these things. They are default. They must provide you an application ID because that's what is unique to that application. Okay, and that's why you cannot give people access at the general level, because what it means is that they can go and edit an application, copy the application ID, and then use it to publish a fake application and redirect people to a rogue application. So everybody must not have access to be able to edit applications. Okay, you put your terms of use, your privacy statement, and then those are things that you can edit. And then you put the homepage, the URL where it redirects. So I can publish a fake app, I can call this application HR property application. Meanwhile, the URL that is behind the application is my password harvesting code. So the user is getting the homepage of the HR property administration asking for username and password, but what is behind is my code that is going to take people's credentials off. Why? Because I have given Joyce account ability to create application, and Joyce account has been hacked by a hacker, and person has published a new application on the tenant and people don't know. So it's a very sensitive function to give people access to publish application. So once a user is enabled for signing, that determines that the user can, has been assigned to an application. User assignment is what says, oh, this user can use this application, and visible to user shows if the application would show on the user's portal. So these access rights are ways that you also grant access to people. This is water. Okay, so this is just giving you a summary about the user behaviors and what they actually mean. When a user is assigned, can the user see? If a user is not assigned, can they not see? It just explains the behavior of when a user is assigned to an application and when the application is visible to the user. Also have to create custom logo. So that's why most times when you see fake internet banking portals, it's very difficult for users to know because it has the logo, it has the interface. The only difference will be the URL, right? Because the URL will be directing you to a fake URL. So I always tell people, I say things like your internet banking, always know what the bank's URL is. It's not just saying, oh, I put GTB and then it just displayed orange with the GTB login. It means that most times why hackers are always successful is that default, that's how users are more interested in the look and feel versus in where is this address from. So from an enterprise application management perspective too, it's the same thing. If somebody comes to your tenant and creates a fake application and does the same thing, your users will just typically fall for it, because majority of users pay more attention to just, the interface versus the URL where that thing is redirecting them to. So people who have access to make this kind of modification on enterprise applications, you need to pay attention to that there are people who need those access, because it's a sensitive function that can determine how an application can be manipulated. Any questions? So as an identity, as an identity and access management person too, even the fact that you have granted people the required access based on your understanding, you can also set certain policies that allows you to get notified. So you can get automatic notification if somebody is requesting for higher permission on an application, which can now allow you to do further investigation to why is this person requiring this level of access on this application. You have the ability to do that using the auth application policies, because beyond the fact that you have done your segregation of duties and you have given people application access, you also want to give visibility to the type of access people are still requiring on these applications.
Sorry, please, could you go back to the last slide? I didn't get that. Yeah, this one, please.
Hello. I'm not
Yeah.
seeing any slide. My is blank. The screen is blank.
Okay, can you Titi, you
is
can
your
go
network.
out and come back.
Your network.
Go out and come back in. Please,
I
could
will
you
wait
explain?
I'll wait for
Okay,
you for
for Titi come
2 minutes.
back. Okay. Titi, are you back? You're muted. We can't hear you. Titi, can you see the screen now?
Same thing. I can't.
Okay, hold on.
Okay,
Let me stop. Let me stop
okay.
sharing.
Okay, if you could reshare, yes, please.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me.
Is the assistant mentor teaching us a song or what?
Yes. Okay, so your question was I should explain this again, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm saying that as an identity and access administrator, you've already granted, you've done the needful, so you've done the right, segregation of duties you've assigned. You also want to be able to, to know when people are requesting for additional permissions on applications, right? And when people are being authorized, because you want to be able to ensure that applications have the right connections. So in addition to your investigations on applications connected to your environment, you can set permission policies. You can say, I have made you an application administrator. It does not now mean that you just go and add anybody in your team and give them right. I want to be able to know when people are giving permission rights and when people are elevated, when people's permissions have been elevated, and I want to get that automated notification right? So you can be automatically alerted that, oh, the HR property management app, somebody is requesting for high permission level there, and it was authorized by XYZ users. You want to know so that you can go back to understand, was it legitimately requested by them, and was it authorized by the real person, or has somebody compromised and is granting people access? And then there are certain permissions you can even set in the policy that once somebody is requesting for this kind of permission, just ban it, don't even approve it, and then or approve it automatically. It doesn't even have to wait for somebody else to approve it, right? So I'm just saying that you can use the auth app policy to do this further investigation and policy and access management. Is that clear?
Yes. Okay. So the auth is authorization. Is that the full name of apps? Is that the authorization apps? What's the
So
full name of?
honestly, I don't know what that acronym stands for, but I know that yes, auth means authorization apps. I don't know what the O stands for, but it's speaking about how you authorize applications. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
Thanks.
used to think it's open authorization.
It's possible.
Mm,
It's possible.
mm,
We will
okay.
check it. Who knows what SSO means?
Single
Single
sign-on.
sign-on.
So who can explain what single sign-on is?
You sign on without a second sign-on, like you don't need MFA, or just one sign-on is enough. That's how I
So
understand it.
okay, give me a scenario to further explain what you're saying.
Okay, I could just sign on with my password. I don't need double authentication.
No,
Okay.
that's not single sign-on. That's not single sign-on.
Okay.
Can I try?
Yes, please. Miriam is speaking today.
I
Go
okay,
ahead.
I'll give an example. Not just for like example, like your mail. I would say like my Gmail, for example. I have it on my phone. I don't have to always put in my passwords and all the time. So I've signed in, except I change an account before I try to come back when I want to sign on. I guess that's what.
1A, a bit of it. That's one part of it. So you can see it's different from what you said, Franca.
Yes, Miriam, I didn't get what you said. Can you repeat?
Miriam, can you repeat yourself for Franca?
So that we can hear you talk
I
too.
said, for example, like your Gmail, for example, you have your Gmail, let's say on your phone, you've already signed in with your password and that. So it's not every time you go back to that mail that you have to put in your password, except you sign out and then you are coming back to the account. They ask you to sign in again. But most times when you go back to your app, you just click, your mail is already open and it just synchronizes.
And I said that's like answer 1A. It's not a complete. Who else wants to go? So I'm saying that, Franca, you can see that's different from what you said. You are saying that you just put only username, you don't put a second factor authentication. That's not single sign-on.
Okay.
MFA is a sign-on. So complete sign-on is complete sign-on. If you set up a sign-on process that says that people must put 2FA, people must put 2FA. The moment you remove 2FA, it doesn't mean that it is now one sign-on. It means that you have changed your sign-on processes. So whether people are using 2FA, whether people are using 3FA, it's still sign-on. Sign-on is sign-on. A single sign-on is saying, I have signed on to application A using joy@contoso.com. I want to sign on to applications B, and my login is joy@contoso.com. I don't want to stress myself putting my password again. Can the application just know that the person who signed on to application 1 is the same person that wants to sign on to application 2? So have you seen sometimes when you want to sign on to another application, the moment you click that you want to use your Gmail and you select your Gmail, what does it do? It doesn't ask you for your username and password. It just goes in. You know why? Because on that browser, you have your Gmail signed on as the first sign on. So the moment you are saying, I want to use this Gmail account to sign on again, it's saying, oh, no problem. You already signed on to your Gmail. So I'm just going to use single sign on. I'm not going to bother you to sign in again.
Yes, ma'am. I think, sorry, I want to give an example as well. Like my office, we don't use Outlook. We use Zoho Mail for and that's Zoho Mail, because I was able to, because when I first got my email login, I changed my password. So the next thing I did, okay, we have our chat platform where we have our meetings and all that. We use Zoho Click, called Zoho Click. So by the time I went to the browser and then opened and typed Zoho Click, it opened, it showed me sign in, sign off. I just clicked on sign in and just opened straight to my Zoho Click. We also have Zoho Project. You just go from there, I type Go Project on my Google and it comes up. I just click on Zoho Project, it opens straight to my projects. So yeah,
so you can see that that's different from what you also answered.
Yes.
Exactly. So
Yes.
single sign-on is, I'm going to sign on to multiple applications using only one. So there must be a first sign-in for single sign-on to function. So your Gmail not allowing you sign in, that one is that you told it to remember your signing. That's not single sign because you are still signing into the same Gmail. But the moment you want to sign into another application that ideally should ask you for your username and password, but you are referencing that in this application, I want to use this signing that I used for the previous one, it won't ask you, it will just go in. So it helps user experience operations to be faster, right? Users don't have to now every time put username and password, as long as that application is using that same sign-in that they have put into the first time. So that's what single sign-on is.
Sorry, ma, I want to ask, was there anything done at the back end to make it happen that way?
Yes,
It's done.
yes, exactly. So single sign-on is not abracadabra. It's so most corporate environments, once they've noticed that, oh, we have 3, 4, 5 applications that our users are going to use. So when you were joining the organization, they said they will give you email. They now said they will give you Zoho projects. They now said they will give you Zoho chats. These are 3 different applications that require signing. They now checked it. Users will feel frustrated, even from a productivity angle. If you put a timer to time yourself, when you set up that email, put in your username and password and sign in. And if when you clicked on chat, you were going to put in username and put password and click sign in, and went to projects and did the same thing. If you calculated the time versus the time of when you clicked chat and as you just clicked sign in, it took you in straight, you will see that you saved some milliseconds. Time that seconds in a day, how many times you go to that application, times it in a week, times it in a month, you would have seen that you have saved working hours and improved on your productivity because you have recovered more time you could use to do other things. These are little mundane things that people who do productivity analysis do, and that's how they create a product. So that's what led into single sign-on coming up, where people always say, if I'm in an organization and my organization knows that all these apps that they're publishing for me, it is the same identity I'm supposed to use. The access that I'm supposed to have on the application is based on the backend role that they've given. But the identity login is the same thing, my email and my password. Why do I have to be putting it all along? Can you just configure single sign-on on each of these applications when you are publishing them? So that once the thing is, oh, single sign is allowed, it will check, is there any place this person has signed in with this thing? Yes, oh yeah. It will try the password that you have put in the cache and it will just go. It's except you have changed the password, then single sign-on will not work. It will now say, this new password has not been used in any way here. Update the new password and every other thing will synchronize. Does that make sense now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Also, it's also very important that when people use applications, you ask for their consent. How many of you ever read the consent pop-up on an application when you're downloading it? How many of you ever read that thing?
I do, ma, but not
I
everything.
don't.
I go through what I look for out for is just to see the retention of data period. That's what I
Yes.
always look out for.
Have you ever wondered how these loan companies that used to call people, they will call you and say, oh, your cousin or your sister or your friend took a loan, you know, and used you for guarantor. And when you call the person raking, why you go use me for guarantor? And the person say, I didn't use you for any guarantor now. Have you ever wondered how those loan people are able to get your contact? The likes of PalmPay and the rest, all these loan companies that go around. It's simple. Their application has the ability to collect the contact list of the device that the application is being installed on. And it is clearly written on the consent terms when the people were downloading. But you know, a typical person is under pressure, wants loan, right? So all he does is click, 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 click. As soon as it's done, what he doesn't know is that he has given the application the right to go to contact list and export. And most times, we all save people on our contact with something that describes who they are or what relationship. Like all of you, your contacts are saved as textilers, right? So if somebody should have your name, textilers. So if somebody should automatically harvest my contact list and was looking for how to do a targeted phishing email to textilers community, the person automatically will get about 20 to 30 people in textilers, because for everybody who I built a relationship through textilers, I put textilers there. The same thing with husbands and wife. You use a pet name for your husband. You use a pet name for your wife. The same thing with your parents. You use something. So that's how they know who. So when they export that list and you default in those loans and they're looking for how to get across to you, you understand? They know that, okay, we have to, if we can reach their friend, if we can reach their colleague, if we can reach their family, then we'll be able to reach this person. So they come, and then when they call you, they now claim that the person used you. So you are now calling the loan, you are now calling that your contact and raking. Why will you use me for? And the person is cracking his head saying, I never used you for any guarantor. And the person is wondering how. And sometimes because the person is ashamed, the person doesn't even want to admit to you that they took loans. So they'll be like, I didn't use you. I don't know what you're talking for. It's scammers. So you now go and say all these scammers. But the truth is, your guy or your girl or your mother or your sister or your cousin brother took loan and did not know that they had, while they were installing, gave their consent that their contact list should be exported. Before an application can access your data, a user must grant the application permission to do so. So it's the same thing with when you are publishing enterprise applications. You must understand what type of data so that you can tell users what kind of permissions that they need to. So it's very important to implement consent settings when you are publishing application.
And besides, they can't go outside.
So this is a typical one you will see here, how Microsoft does its own, you know, allow user consent from apps, verify publishers, blah, 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 blah. And you just click yes, 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 you know, without paying attention. And you know, the interesting thing is, even when you now go back and you uninstall the app, you know, that first time you have done, they have taken the data. It's not like when you uninstall the app, they've now, they will now release your data to you, right? How many of you use Truecaller?
No, I don't use it.
So how, but how many of you know the app Truecaller? It's a very good app. I like the concept. But like I
know
tell
the app.
people,
Yeah.
yeah, like I tell people, It's the same concept behind Truecaller, because how is Truecaller able to know? Is that I download Truecaller. Truecaller requires my consent to export my contact list. Then Franca downloads. Miriam doesn't download. But I have Miriam's number. So when I download Truecaller and it exports my list, it has a database now of my contacts. And inside that database is Miriam's number with her name. So the moment Franca is calling Miriam, the moment Miriam is calling Franca, even if Franca doesn't have Miriam's number, because Franca has Truecaller, she will automatically see that the person calling her is Miriam, text her, because I have Truecaller and I saved Miriam's name as Miriam texted us. So it's a good app when people want to know who is calling them that they don't have their number. But it's an app that is the app is to do rub my back, rub your back, meaning that I will help you know people that you don't have their numbers, but it means that for every number you already have in your database, I have collected it so that I can populate my own database. So it's a give or take app. I tried it. I bought, to prove the point, I bought a new SIM years back when I was trying to prove it to someone, and I brand new SIM, took my first phone, saved the number on the SIM and called it, then it was Etisalat line, Etisalat. That's what I called the name, Etisalat. And then took my other phone that I had Truecaller on. So took this, and I didn't save my new number on it, and took the phone and dialed, and Truecaller called the number Etisalat. And going forward, I didn't share that number with people because it was my secondary line. I just got it for other stuff. When I ran out of credit on my main line and I would use that number to call people, it will always show up as Etisalat. And I told someone, I said, I have friends, I said, why they call, why kind number be this? And I said, yes, I also want to prove to people that Truecaller only takes the database from existing people's phone. It's not spirit to just know that this number is the first person that introduces that number into Truecaller. Whatever you save that name with is what to put in his database. So it's very important also when you're publishing enterprise application to enable the consent settings so that people are accepting, right, what they are using the app for, right? And you can customize these consent setting policies. Again, every time we show you the things you can do on the cloud, we would like to show you how you can extend it to an on-prem environment. So if you have company applications that are hosted in your internal network, but you want your users to be able to access it. We've been talking about cloud apps. Cloud apps are things that are hosted on the cloud. Now, your company has applications hosted in its corporate head office, but you want your users to be able to access it when they have gone home, or when they are using unmanaged device, or when they're using their mobile phones. But these applications are not hosted over the internet. These applications do not have internet visibility. You can use the application proxy function to extend on-prem applications to now show over the internet without exposing those applications to the internet directly. So it's a proxy setting method. My mind is telling me that was too much. I should find a way to break it down again.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Don't mind us. We that started IT in the olden days, it's always very difficult to understand these new methods of I'm looking for.
Okay, but I get the logic. Let me just say what I got from what you said is okay, like for people that have like on-prem applications, that for people that want to use it, that they use the Azure AD application proxy. That's if you're at home, if you have these applications in your office and you're at home working, you could use the Azure AD application proxy. Yeah. So that's in a nutshell, that's what I got. So to have it on cloud is a tool.
Okay, so this is an application that is in your corporate network. It can be anything. This application is not available over the internet. The application can only be accessed. The application can only be accessed from on-prem. This is on-prem. You know what on-prem is? Your corporate headquarters, physical office. You've come to the physical office. We call it on-prem. And so you as a user, you come and you access the application. But when you're over the internet, you cannot access it. If you take that URL that you have here on your browser and put it when you're at home, it will not open. Now, with Azure AD App Proxy, it's possible to do it. So you are not publishing this application over the internet. What you are doing is that you're coming up and you are setting up a component here called the Azure AD Proxy. And on that Azure AD Proxy, you are going to configure that when users come here and they want to go to this URL that normally will not open, so you come here and you configure the URL. Then through the internet, it will go back internal and it will now open it. So the Azure AD Proxy is what enables it to be able to go over the internet, and then the user will be able to hit the application. Meanwhile, on the network, this application is not internet facing. Let me take you guys to a bit of networking. Why do you think, what do you think makes an application available on the internet and does not make it available? Or have you heard of scenarios like that where, oh, they say this application is not available on the internet? Have you worked in organizations where you have application that they say, oh, you can access this thing on the internet, and then they say, oh, you can't access this one on the internet? Titi, have you had customers tell you, oh, we want to be able to access the CCTV over the internet, and you say, oh, it's not available over the internet? Do you have cases like that where people say, oh, we want to access this thing over the internet, and then some people say, oh, it's not accessible over the internet? Are we used to those kind of conversations, or is it new for you? Let me start from there.
No, at all. I never asked
It's new for me. It's new for me.
Okay, so Titi, are you saying that for every CCTV you set up, they've never wanted you to make it available over the internet?
No, we have done some customer request. There is a camera with an IP. There are some that is analog. So we have done. I've done both. I've worked on both, and I never see any scenario that warranted such.
No, I'm saying when you say you worked on both, I'm confused. You worked on both of what?
Okay, we have different cameras. We have the one with IP that you can use the internet, and we have the analog that you can use only in a business environment without internet.
That's what I'm saying. So you see that one that you are calling analog, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So what you are calling analog, are you saying that those cameras don't have IP addresses?
Yes. They are different type. They are different from the IP, the one with internet, the camera device.
Okay, so that's my typical scenario.
Okay, ma, can I speak? Sorry. Okay,
Yes.
so because like in the bank, we have, for example, the bank verification portal, the BVN verification portal. So the BVN verification portal, when you are in the banking, when we are in the bank, like when we're in the office, you can go to, like, let's say Chrome, and then you open it, it will work. But when you are, that's when you're connected to the bank's network. But when you are at home, you can't verify anybody's BVN.
Perfect. So what happens is that bank verification portal, we're going to call it app, is sitting somewhere in the bank. And it's only when Miriam is in the office, a customer walks in, she can. But the moment Miriam goes home, she knows the URL. She takes the URL, she puts in her browser. It doesn't open. And I'm saying that, do you know why? Simple. The IP address that was used to publish that bank verification portal is not what we call an internet-facing IP address. So today in IP address systems, when we're doing IP addressing, right? And we're doing IP addressing, IP addresses have public and private. So for TT, even though the cameras are IP enabled, it means that the customer gives them internet-facing IP addresses. If your customer does not give you an internet-facing IP address, whether it is an IP-based camera or not, you will not see it from the internet. What allows you to see things over the internet is that those IP addresses are internet-facing IP address. Today, the international body that is responsible for IP address has different class of IP address. We have IP addresses that are internal network and IP addresses that are public-facing. So the ability for you to see anything on the internet today is because that IP address is public facing. That's why no matter how long a hacker hacks, a hacker can still be tracked because of IP addresses. And that's why the only way hackers choose to hide themselves is to masquerade their IP addresses. So that's where you see things like VPN tunnel. You see things like, so I am in Ireland, but I want, when I'm connecting to Nigeria, for them to think that I'm in Nigeria doing the fraud. So I use a VPN tunnel and select my IP address to be showing Nigeria, just so that by the time they start their investigation, they'll be sweating first. They'll be seeing IP address of Nigeria. Meanwhile, I'm not there, before they'll be able to do further forensic. But no matter how a hacker, badass a hacker is, the hacker is always eventually found. Because as long as you're going through the internet, every IP address is registered. IP addresses are what enable anything to be available over the internet. It's just that users remember names first. So you are calling it google.com. The reason why you can go to Google is because Google IP address is internet facing. And all you need to do is go to portals that will tell you whose IP is this. Take google.com, put it there to give your Google IP. The same thing with your banks. You want to know. So for instance, in ethical hacking, if I wanted to hack a bank today, the first thing I want to do is know what the bank's IP address is. What's the first thing I do? I go to their website and I take their website and I put, and it will give me the IP address of the website. If I feel like, oh, maybe their website, they're hosting it on Azure, I want to know, I go for their internet banking and it will give me all the IP address. And I have a block of IP addresses that I can now span for listening ports and then be able to find compromising ports and XYZ. I'm able to start my process of hacking. So everything has an IP address. So bring it back to our class. What are we saying? We're saying that for us to remember, we're looking at how to leverage on the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps to provide more security around cloud applications. However, we said that we found out that some certain organizations have their applications on-prem. Do they now miss out from this wonderful threat protection analytics that the cloud apps can do? No. So what do? We say, introduce what we call the Azure AD application proxy, and it will allow you to be able to extend those your on-prem applications to be accessed over the internet without really giving them public IP address. So that means if somebody naturally comes and puts that BVM portal directly on the portal on their browser, it will still not open. But when Miriam wants to go there, Miriam goes through the application proxy. Then the application proxy will tunnel her directly to the BVM portal and it will open. So she will never be seeing the BVM portal URL. It's just that she knows it, but it will never show when she's going through her proxy. And then she will find out that she can open BVN and she can still do her verification. So when you have people in the bank do things like they're doing for marketing campaigns, they are going off-site locations, and in that marketing campaign, they want to open accounts. They come to IT. Please, we're going for a marketing blast. We're going for a marketing blast, and we're going to UNN, and we want these students we have been given guarantee that over 50,000 students, this is their matric, and we want to be able to register them, open accounts for them instantly. And in the process of opening an account, you need to do BVN registration. One of the ways the bank can do it what the bank normally do is give VPN connection so that people connect with VPN. But another way is without doing VPN, they can create the Azure AD proxy for that BVN verification portal. And users will be able to now verify BVN without necessarily exposing the application over the internet. So what have I explained? I just said application proxy is one of the features of that enables you to access on-prem web application from a remote client, right? It will run in the cloud, and then the app proxy connector will run on your on-prem server. And then this will allow you to securely pass your user sign-in token from your Azure AD to your web application, and your application has not been exposed on the internet. One of the value of this is you are able to take your Kerberos token to a modern authentication token without necessarily exposing this identity. And you can still do single sign-on for this process. So this is what I was trying to draw here, where I said you have your on-prem. This is your on-prem application, like the BVM portal that she talked about. This is your normal Active Directory. Now you put the application proxy connector in your on-prem that talks. Then you come to the Azure AD here, and then you enable the application proxy service. So user A starts the first thing. She goes into Azure AD, puts joy@contoso.com. I authenticate. So I put joy@contoso.com. Then Azure AD replies me and says, yes, username and password is correct, your MFA is correct. And then it says, oh, in your access, you have an app called BVN verification, right? When I click on that BVN verification, it goes to the application proxy service because that's how I published it. And the application proxy service takes me straight into my application proxy connector sitting on my on-prem. My application proxy connector validates that, oh, Azure AD, I am on-prem AD. Are you sure of this communication? It says yes, it responds back, and then I now go to the BVM portal and I'm able to see the login page. I can do single sign on there, or I can put my username and password again, and then it now takes the BVM verification that I've asked for, and I see the display on my screen from outside without exposing this application directly to the internet. Again, you will see how to do this in your lab. So we talked about now how you are using your Zoho, right? You are doing Zoho in your office and you are using your login details to go into Zoho. So it's the same thing. You can put a Zoho here can be, a Zoho is a cloud app. So you can have a Zoho here. And then if your organization is using Microsoft Azure AD as their identity provider, they can integrate into any third-party application here. You can integrate into any third-party application here, and you can use your Azure AD or even into any external identity systems, and you can use your Azure AD to log into them, right? Those are some of the things also with single sign-on will do for you. So you can use the identity to log into any of these. Some of them now on Microsoft are already default Azure apps that we have in the gallery. They're already pre-configured due to the business relationship that exists between Microsoft and these third parties. So most organizations now, if their application owners come and say, we are launching this application for our people, all the identity you need to do is search on the marketplace for this application and configure the integration, and people will be able to use the identity and log in into these cloud apps, and it automatically know that, okay, the tenant you are going to is the tenant for Contoso. It's another way that we improve on productivity in companies. Also, you can do application user provisioning using the Azure AD also, by creating identities and roles in the cloud app application that users need to access, remove users. So one of the things that Microsoft has done is, ideally, what you will see in organizations is you get a cloud HR, you log into the HR and create users. You get stuff, Salesforce, you create user. You get Workday, you create user. You get this one, you create user. What will normally happen is when users are leaving the organizations, you are struggling to manage all these user accounts. Now, if you integrate these applications with Azure AD, right, what it does for you is that you can manage the identity all from here. So the moment Joy in the HR department, they come and they tell you, the HR department, they come and they tell you, we have 3 users, Joy, Franca, and Miriam. And Joy is payroll, Franca is learning and development, Miriam is onboarding. You can come to the Azure AD and create these roles here. And because of this integration that we have done with the cloud apps, you would integrate it, you will come to the cloud apps to say that your identity provider is Azure AD. And so the moment you do that, it will synchronize all the roles that you want into here. And so you don't have to come here and be creating the users one by one. It automatically synchronizes. So when you come here, you see all your users that are here based on the group that you had synchronized here, and you can now select those users, and based on the access rights you give them on Azure AD, that's how they'll be able to function here. So you don't have to be configuring here and configuring here. The identity access, so you can have your identity access team still be the ones manage your identity for your applications due to this seamless integration and doing things like application user provisioning. It allows you to do automatic provision, and you can create new accounts, deprovision, synchronize data, provision using groups without worrying about doing it inside the application once you do this integration between your third-party applications and Azure AD. So whenever you hear things like manual provision, like I said, applications allow you to manually come into them and start creating accounts one by one. Automatic provisioning will allow you to just use Azure AD, which will automatically, once it has done the integration with the connector to that application, provisioning of user becomes easy and straightforward. Again, one key thing we always brag about in Azure AD is the ability to have usage and insights, right? So you want to see what are the top used applications in my organization, what applications have the most failed signing, what are the top signing errors for each application. You can gain all this kind of, and it helps you to be able to provide identity governance and improve on the identity processes in your organization. Because after you've done everything as an identity access person, you want to start doing improvements. So you can say, oh, we've noticed over time that people use property application very often to maybe the corporate services has a hiring the car booking application. So people use it a lot over weekends to get lots of signings during weekend. Or we've noticed that people are always having failed signings whenever they're using this application. What could be the cause? Could it be that the application is always timing out or something? Because it will be able to tell you what type of signing errors that you are seeing. And that's the good thing about integrating the Azure Active Directory to your applications, because it helps you get a lot of insights that help you handle troubleshooting. And you can see lots of audit logs, things like the date and time something happened, when it was logged, the category, the status, who initiated, all of these things. If you don't integrate to Azure AD, you struggle as an identity administrator person to be troubleshooting. When people come and say, users are always complaining that they are getting password and username and password failed, what is happening? The audit log will show you, the usage and analytics will show you. That's the good thing about doing this integration. It takes away a lot of back and forth stress. You can see what applications have been added to So even as an identity, if you have given people a right to be able to add applications, you can also come to the application-based report to see, okay, the last time I checked, we had 3, now we have 7. What are these 7 new applications? Oh, the last time I checked, we have 7, now we have 4. Which applications have removed? What's the accounts that I used to do this integration? What's the name? Who gave consent to this application? You can use it to do certain level of governance. So you can also create your applications into what we call collections. It just enables you to manage these applications better. Okay. It's a collection essentially applies a filter to the application a user can already have access to. So a user will only see those applications that are in their collection. It's another way. Collections are another way to also do access management. You can say, okay, in HR, they use Salesforce, they use property management, they use car booking, they use this. You know what? Let me create a collection called HR so that anybody, now this can help you cascade down to even grouping. You can say, once I've added somebody in a group called HR group, that person automatically would have access to a collection called HR application. So you don't have to manually, when you're on board, it helps when users are coming to the organization for the first time. You don't have to start, they'll keep sending tickets. And we have a new star, name is Joy, give access to booking portal. We have a answer, new name is Joy, give access to car platform. We have just now in HR by default, everybody in HR needs access to it. It doesn't determine that their access will say that flat access is what gives them the power of what they can do. Them just let them even be able to see the application first. Then depending on what they need to do, based on segregation of duties, that will be the other groups. Where you can have a group that says this group is tied to this collection, so that I don't have to worry about the number of applications you will see. Let it be that when you see the application, you now don't have access to log into it, but at least you will see it and you will know that, okay, in HR, these are the applications I need to use. We've already talked over and over again about integrating applications. So this is just taking us to how we can actually now do this application integration. And we've understood that, it's very important to leverage on the Azure AD, in order to be able to, for application integration, so that you can do things like authentication, authorization, single sign-on, user provisioning and synchronization, and publishing using proxy, role-based access control. These are some of the benefits when you publish your application on Azure AD, right? And applications have two distinct properties: application object, service principals, which allow you to determine, we've already talked about it, every application has a unique application ID object, which is why you don't want anyhow person to be able to edit these properties and copy out the application ID objects. These are for developers. They know how to put the application ID objects. Service principles too are what helps you to be able to govern an application, right? Is what helps you to be able to govern an application and identify where the application is on the tenant. So when you're creating a new application, it will require you to have a token for authorization, for consent, and then you create a service principal and then a return token. Most times.
Sorry, excuse me. Hello.
Hello, Franca.
Yeah, please, could you explain service principles again? I didn't get that.
So the service principle is what helps you to govern that an application is connecting to Azure AD. So it allows you to be able to manage the applications that are on the Azure portal. I'm trying to look for the best way to explain this to you. So when you're creating the service principle, for instance, it will ask you, who are the administrators of this application? Who are the users of this application? What's the application ID? Is like what helps you to uniquely say that this application, these are the things that govern it. So only these people inside this user group can access it. These are the conditional access policies for it. These are the type of permissions for it. So when you're registering an application, you can create a service principle with these different elements inside that now allows you to be able to say this service principle is specific to the HR property management portal. So once all these conditions inside here, are met, this application can now be successfully published. So even if somebody takes the code of the HR application and tries to publish it without those principles, the application will not be able to form, because when you're publishing it, you see that it's not matching, because the person doesn't know what those principles are, so it's not going to match it. So it's a way for you to govern that, okay, somebody cannot recreate this our HR application on the tenant, because this principle is what governs that this application is going to be successfully published here. Again, this is for people who will be responsible with publishing applications. Now, this is very key. I don't know why Microsoft does this, but by default, all users can register an application. I don't know whether it's because of the drive of Power Apps. Power Apps too by default is enabled for all users. And let's say to go and remove the licensing. That's why if you look at those licensing, when you are signing license, I've told you it's not just by clicking the root. You have to expand it and see that there are some licensing functions, sub licensing side that you don't want to give users. So by default, all users have a right to register an application. So it's very important that you disable this functionality when you're setting up your identity. If not, everybody can configure and register an application, and it has its adverse effect. Like I said, I think Microsoft did it because of the drive towards Power Apps adoption. People should be able to automate their processes easily. But from a governance and security perspective, it's very risky. So we also advise people to go and disable app registration. I think in one of the labs, it was called out on how to disable it. So you can see when you are installing an application with the Microsoft identity, you can see here it's even telling you. So this is just to even explain. I think that by default, applications request for certain interactions, with the platform where they're integrating. In this instance here, you can see that when you're integrating an application with Microsoft identity, for it is going to require this access and consent and permissions, right? And that's how it's applicable in the outside world. Every application is requiring a consent before they can proceed. It's just that most times we don't read what that consent is. So by default, is to want to have user calendar access, write to the calendar, send a mail, and that's why it's able to do those things. Different types of permissions and consent and permission type. This is just reiterating what we've talked about, right? Who should be able to do what. Some delegated permissions can be consented to by non-administrative users. It's also very important you understand which administrator roles can consent to delegated permissions. Always see administrator role permissions in Azure AD. This is where your role comes into. You are not the developer who is going to develop the app. but you want to know, who am I giving access to publish? Who am I giving access to modify, to give consent? Because that's where you come in as the identity and access administrator. Again, we've talked about this application role, right? You define application roles through the Azure portal. We've talked about it, how people will sign into the application. When you are publishing an application, you can also determine from the application UI who can have access to the application, okay? Or through the app manifest editor, who can access this application. This is now, we looked at the application role that we looked at when we're looking at application administrator and cloud was who can publish, but now who can access an application? So from a user perspective, who can see this application, who can log in, what can they do when they log in into this application? You will see it again in the labs. Trying to rush, we've exceeded time. So cyber attacks have become very sophisticated in the way that they can exploit, you know, your apps you have deployed in your on-prem and cloud infrastructure. That's true. One of the starting points for cyber attacks is through privilege escalation. Go and study any attack that you have seen being published out. The first level of penetration is that they elevate their privileges. Then they do what we call bilateral movement, and then they exfiltrate data. That's like the three main things that happen during any cyber attack. Once they have established access to your environment, the next thing they want to do is elevate their access. And once they've elevated, they start to move around, and then they take away data. And if you see that these three key things are governed by the type of access and identity that somebody has. So in order to understand the potential risks and stop these types of attacks, you need to gain clear visibility into your organization's app compliance posture. So people are published, and you need to know, how are these apps, you know, what's the compliance posture? What are the gaps that we have? You need to also know when apps begin to exhibit, you know, anomalous behaviors. So why is this app acting like this? Why is it always shutting down and powering up at a certain time? So that you can respond to these behaviors and identify the risk to your environment or to your data or to your users. So there's another feature that we call the app governance feature that is inside the Defender for cloud apps, and also helps you to improve on your security policy management capability, right? And so it helps you do things like insights. You can see all the third-party apps, create proactive or reactive policies. You know, when we say proactive, reactive, proactive is, I don't have to wait till this thing happen. I have to think that based on the way I'm seeing this thing, anytime I see X, Y, Z should happen like that. Reactive is, okay, when I see this kind of things, what do I do? Help you to also detect and remediate. So the app governance add-on feature helps us to be able to have this level of intelligence when we're using Microsoft Defender for cloud. It also here also talks about how you can enable this in your Defender for cloud. It's also a paid feature that you use the trial method. Okay, that brings us to the end of today. Do we have any questions so far?
Please, could you, the last slide, could you explain, could you go through the last slide again?
This one. Which one, please?
No, the one that says the app governance insights. Okay, then.
I'll repeat myself again. I said, when cyber attacks want to happen, right, what they come for is your identity. And once they've been able to establish that point, they want to now elevate their credentials. They want to move bilateral, and they want to exfiltrate data. So what that means to you is that even though you think that you are doing segregation of duties, you are doing least privilege, you want to be able to make sure that you know when there are potential risk and stop this type of attacks. You want to be able to gain clear visibility into your organization's app compliance. You want to be able to say, oh, why are these applications exhibiting anomalous behaviors? And how do I respond to it? How do I know if there are risks from the applications that have been published in my environment to my users and my organization and data? The ability to gain this level of visibility is by using the feature that we call the app governance feature. When you enable this feature on the Microsoft Defender for application, it will give you insights. You'll be able to see all the third-party applications that are on your tenants. You can now see their alert on activities. And not only seeing it, it will allow you to create proactive and reactive policies. What does that mean? Proactive is I don't have to wait till I have a compromise. I can say if I see XYZ anomaly with an application, maybe every time the application, there's always a permission change on the application service principal. I can now say, okay, based on this user pattern and behavior, I want this to action. Okay, or I can be reactive, saying that once I see it, then I action. It allows you to also do detection and remediation. So I'm saying that in order for us to prevent cyber attacks, once we have granted our environment to allow us publish third-party application, what you want to do is to be able to see and gain visibility, and you only do that using the app governance add-on feature. I don't know if that helped.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have any other question? Okay, in the absence of any other question, we would stop the recording for today so that we can take questions on if you're having issues with your lab. Thank you very much. If you're watching us on YouTube, this is Techstylers Community, the cohort 4 and the security learning part. Today is our day 6 where we've been learning on identity and access administrator. Please do well to watch all our previous sessions on our YouTube channel, like, share, and if you're not yet a member of the community, we encourage you to join, because that's where we will continue this learning even when we close next week with our last class. Thank you very much, and my name remains Joy Emedom.
Thank you.